Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's some of the stories we've been following for you today. With the Delta variant spreading throughout the U.S., we spoke with Dr. Peter McCullough, a cardiologist who has been on the front lines treating patients infected with the CCP virus. Today, Senate Democrats blocked a Republican proposal to include border wall funding in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But a bipartisan amendment to expand highways across 5 southern states was adopted after the New York Attorney General's announcement of her investigation's findings on Governor Cuomo. President Biden, House Speaker Pelosi, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer have all renewed their calls for the Democratic governor to resign. The CDC has just initiated another eviction moratorium. The eviction moratorium is one of those convoluted issues that has become another political lightning rod. On the one hand, you have some legitimate cases of those who have faced hardships due to the pandemic. On the other hand, you have landlords who are being forced to bear the burden. Many of these landlords rely on the rental income to support their families or have made these investments to support themselves in retirement. Since the moratorium was enacted shortly after the CCP virus outbreak, landlords throughout the country have not been able to evict tenants for non-payment. There have been many reported cases of tenants taking advantage of the loophole and who wind up squatting for months on end, forcing the landlord to bear the financial burden, even if they have mortgages on the property and rely on the rental income to pay the mortgage. There is no perfect solution to this problem, but landlords have argued that if the government must get involved, then the government should be subsidizing the payments for the non-paying tenants. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell alluded that that idea may be a possibility.
Well, it looks like the money is there, and it's either still in Washington, or it's down at state and local government, or somewhere in between.
The CDC just issued a new moratorium extending it to October 3rd, but it's unclear if this will withstand legal challenge based on a Supreme Court decision handed down in late July, stating that in order for a moratorium beyond July 31st, Congress would have to pass legislation. We will be following this and will keep you updated. Over the last couple of months, new CCP virus infections caused by the Delta variant increased by 90%. According to the CDC, the Delta variant accounts for at least 93% of all new CCP virus cases in the U.S. during the last 2 weeks of July. To put that in perspective, at the end of May, Delta represented only about 3% of all new infections. As the country faces new CCP virus restrictions and mandates, we spoke to a doctor who has been watching this virus play out from the front lines. Dr. Peter McCullough, internist and cardiologist from Dallas, Texas. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, Dr. McCullough, you are highly regarded in your field in dealing with the heart and kidneys, and you're the single most published person in the world in this field. You've also been on the front lines of this pandemic since the outbreak, treating patients, watching this virus. Doctor, we're still in the midst of the pandemic, looking back at what we've done over the past year from mask mandates to lockdowns, and now it's heading toward potentially mandating vaccines. We're seeing that in New York City. Do you think that we've taken the right approach?
I think we've been off base. Both vaccines and masks don't treat acute people. We're in the middle of an outbreak now. It's almost all the Delta variant. Americans are getting sick, both those who are unvaccinated and those who took the vaccine. And our CDC stopped reporting on vaccine failure cases in May. So now we're flying blind, and there's an assumption that everyone's unvaccinated, and it's not the case. So I have patients in my practice, actually people in my family circle, who've been fully vaccinated, and they're getting COVID-19. So the important points are to focus on sick people. We have monoclonal antibodies available across the United States. People who are high risk or seniors need to demand monoclonal antibody treatment within the first 12 days of symptoms. Hopefully in the first 1 or 2 days, they can be given at major hospitals and clinics, and then move into what we call sequence multi-drug therapy. There are protocols by the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, Frontline Critical Care Consortium, and American Frontline Doctors. These are the organizations that are treating patients acutely with COVID-19 to reduce hospitalization and death.
Now, doctor, why do you think we've ended up taking this approach, and what has led us to the situation, or shall I say, who has led us to this situation?
Our government agencies have just never focused on acutely sick patients. We've had 2 administrations. They make no mention of acutely sick COVID patients and what to do at home to prevent hospitalization and death. Neither have our major medical centers. None of our major medical centers have outpatient treatment clinics or outpatient treatment protocols. They simply tell patients to go home and wait until they're sick enough to come into the hospital. It clearly has failed over now a year and 4 and 5 months. We need early treatment. It needs to be a U.S. standard. At this point in time, it's too late for the vaccines, and they're failing to control the pandemic. The Delta variant looks like it is resistant to the vaccines. We have very good data from Israel, the United Kingdom. Now, there's a nursing home outbreak in Finland. These are all published data suggesting that the Delta variant is resistant to the effect of the vaccines.
Dr. McCullough, if you could, in 60 seconds or less, on the issue of the Delta variant, can you let our viewers know how this variant differs from the previous variants that we've been dealing with in the United States?
The Delta variant has 7 mutations. In fact, there's a Delta Plus with an additional mutation. It's markedly changed the spike protein, so the antibodies that are produced after Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J no longer neutralize that spike protein. So they're non-neutralizing antibodies at this point in time. A paper by Fahrenholt in Houston has shown that a vaccinated person can get Delta, acquire it, and then transmit it to someone else. So the vaccinated individuals actually can transmit Delta. In Israel, we know 84% of COVID patients right now, we assume it's Delta, have been fully vaccinated. So it's fairly clear that the vaccines can't stop the Delta variant, at least not completely. We hope that patients who receive the vaccine do receive some benefit from this, but I don't want anyone here to be falsely reassured that the vaccine is going to protect them at this point in time. Seniors should seek early treatment with the organizations that I've mentioned. Early treatment now should be a standard. We have a variety of drugs supported by scientific studies that can help people avoid hospitalization and death. Our data suggests that 85% of hospitalizations and death can be avoided with early treatment, but we've got to start in the first couple days.
Dr. Peter McCullough, a very well-respected internist and cardiologist from the great state of Texas. Greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We know this infrastructure bill dedicates around $1 trillion of Americans' tax dollars to pay for hard infrastructure projects and some clean energy projects. Melina, can you give us more details about what's included in this spending bill and how the debate is going there on Capitol Hill?
Yes, Steve, so the majority of the funding that's in this bill pays for hard infrastructure such as highways, waterways, and broadband. Actually, a huge chunk of the money goes towards specifically highways, around $300 billion. There's also a small portion of funding that would go towards green energy projects like electric vehicles, charging stations, and zero emissions buses. Now, there are also some interesting details in this bill. For example, new cars would be required to have an alcohol monitoring device, which would detect the level of blood alcohol concentration in the driver. And if the driver is detected to have a high level of blood alcohol concentration, the vehicle won't operate properly. There's also another thing included in this bill is a pilot program for a mileage tax. So this would mean Americans would have to pay a tax based on their mileage. But this is only for research purposes right now. It's just to allow the government to do some research and see if this mileage tax would be effective and efficient, Steve.
And we know that the Biden administration has commented on this possible mileage tax, clarifying that the pilot program would just be applied to research purposes for now. So how's debate there on the Senate looking for now?
Well, Steve, debate on this bill has been robust this week. Hundreds of amendments have been proposed so far, and one bipartisan amendment was actually adopted to extend Interstate 14 out west. It would designate 5 southern states from Texas to Georgia as the future corridor of Interstate 14. Now, only a handful of all the amendments of the 250 amendments have been voted on so far, but Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell warned Schumer that if he cuts off debate too early, he'll lead Republicans in voting against the final passage of this bill, Steve.
Thanks, Melina. So once Senator Schumer does stop allowing amendments to this bill, it could be voted on for final passage as early as next week, but then the House will have to take it up. Melina, from your perspective, does it look like the House has the votes to pass this?
Well, Steve, that's some sticky territory because House Democrats have said they will not vote for this bipartisan infrastructure package unless there's 100% guaranteed that they'll have their $3.5 trillion reconciliation package right alongside it. And that would pay for things like expanding Medicare, universal pre-K, free community college, affordable housing, and other social welfare programs such as that. Senate Republicans came out and spoke about this, saying that this is what's coming next, and they were urging Americans to pay attention to it.
They're going to have to tax everybody, and it's not fair. It's not fair to people that are working hard.
They explained how much the national debt has spiked and that this trillions of dollars in massive spending from the government is going to eventually affect middle to low income Americans because they say that somebody will have to bear the brunt of these costs.
All right, thanks, Melina. And all these massive spending plans come as some leading economists are warning of inflation, although the Biden administration is insisting that the looming inflation is caused by the economic recovery from the CCP virus lockdowns and that it will only be temporary. However, some economists have said it is not temporary, especially if the Federal Reserve continues to inflate the money supply. President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called on Governor Cuomo to resign Tuesday. This is after the New York Attorney General's independent investigation found that the governor sexually harassed multiple women.
Are you now calling on him to resign?
Yes, I think he should resign.
Being asked if he will now call on Governor Cuomo to resign, given the investigator said that 11 women were credible, President Biden gave a clear answer. House Speaker Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer have also renewed their calls for Governor Cuomo to resign. Cuomo released a video statement on Tuesday denying his wrongdoing and gave every indication that he will not leave office. However, the New York State Assembly has already started an impeachment inquiry. It's not clear yet if it will pass, although it is likely. The Pentagon has identified the police officer that was fatally stabbed on Tuesday, and they are flying flags at half-staff to honor the officer. The slain officer is George Gonzalez, a New York native and an Army veteran. He served in Iraq and joined the police force 3 years ago. He died after a man attacked him on a bus platform outside of the Pentagon Tuesday morning. The FBI is leading the investigation into the case. The suspect was identified as Austin William Lenz, a 27-year-old Georgia man. The crisis on the U.S. border is not going away. The month of July alone has seen over 200,000 illegal crossings on the southern border. A bipartisan bill is introduced by Senator Robert Menendez and Marsha Blackburn to secure the American pharmaceutical industry and to reduce dependence on China. President Biden sidesteps a reporter's question about his administration's allowing illegal immigrants to spread the CCP virus in the U.S. Fox News' Peter Doocy asked President Biden why his administration is letting record numbers of untested and unvaccinated migrants into the U.S. Biden did not appear to answer the question directly.
We have not withdrawn the order that is sometimes critical or criticized, saying that unvaccinated people should go back across the border.
According to Customs and Border Protection, more than 188,000 migrants were apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border in June, marking a 21-year high. The month of July has seen record numbers of illegal immigration on the southern border. Todd Bensman is a senior national security fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, D.C. Now, Todd, you're actually not in D.C. You spent a lot of your time on the other side of the border. Right now, you're based in Texas. Now, illegal immigration and the border crisis has been driving the headlines for quite some time over the past 5 months. Where are we right now in terms of solutions and the overall situation on the border?
Well, in terms of the overall situation at the border, the July numbers of apprehensions and/or encounters are leaking out now. They're looking to be about 210,000. Those aren't finalized, but 210,000 encounters, the vast majority of them being with Border Patrol, migrants between ports of entry, kind of caught in the brush or turning themselves in. That is very much a record high. We haven't seen any number like that in well over 20 years. June and July are historically cyclical numbers where they're low because of the heat, but the heat did not stop this surge. It went straight on up through June and July, and we're probably going to look at even higher numbers in August.
Now that's interesting. Now, one major issue that we're hearing about, Todd, in relation to these numbers is that roughly 20% of the illegal immigrants crossing the border right now are actually testing positive for the CCP virus, and they're being allowed to come into the country. You just wrote a piece stating that in July alone, 210,000 people crossed the border illegally. That's a significant amount of people that are testing positive for the virus. What do you make of this, and how can this be resolved?
Well, there needs to be protocols to quarantine those immigrants that are testing positive or showing signs of symptoms. But we are getting reporting in that there is no protocol, or that the protocols that they have are very inconsistently applied. We just had a family of very sick immigrants found in a Whataburger down on the border in McAllen area, coughing and hacking and sneezing on everybody. And they were supposed to have been kept by Catholic Charities in a hotel nearby, but under quarantine. But obviously nobody's watching them, and probably there's nobody to watch them. We know that the Border Patrol tries to maintain people in their quarantine on their premises, but there are just too many to do that. So they're having to release them on their own recognizance, or to NGOs that we're just hoping are keeping track of these people. It's a very porous system. I don't trust it. I don't think anybody should be trusting this system. And a great many immigrants, tens of thousands, are being put on buses and shipped to all four corners of the United States.
So Todd, I think, there's a lot of heated debate and rhetoric sometimes on both sides, and some of the key points tend to get lost in the mix, which is nobody's necessarily saying that these people are bad, but they're coming here, a lot of them, for economic reasons, and they're essentially cutting the line. There's still a long line of people trying to immigrate to the United States in the correct ways. Isn't that right?
Well, that's right. Probably, the majority of people who want to enter the United States or immigrate to the United States do it the legal way. We bring in over 1 million immigrants every year legally, at least before COVID. I think the numbers fluctuated during the COVID period.
Now, I also believe the president of Mexico and maybe Guatemala have criticized those policies as well, saying that, that this is actually the reason, not the economic situation in their countries.
The president of Mexico has come right out and said, no, this is the Biden policies caused this to happen. And the same with the Guatemalan president. It's not about root causes. Root causes are steady state in Mexico and Latin America. They're just simply poorer countries. Those are never going to change, not for a long time. What does change is the lever on our gates. Whether our gates open or close depends on whose hand is on that lever, and it's Joe Biden's hand on that lever, and he has opened it.
Todd Bensman, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
A bipartisan bill sponsored by 2 senators seeks to reform student loan bankruptcy laws that Congress passed decades ago. The senators discussed the pervasiveness of student loan debt.
We have talked about this problem of student loan and student debt long enough. It's time to fix it. Our bill would restore the ability of student loan borrowers to discharge federal student loans after a waiting period of 10 years. And it would pair this reform with accountability measures for colleges and schools that have consistently high default rates.
Some institutions of higher education, no matter the size or the name on the door, are playing with house money. They can charge sky-high tuition, pocket taxpayer dollars, and graduate students who can't find jobs. When that happens, that's simply wrong. Schools need to face a little accountability.
The bill is called the Fresh Start Through Bankruptcy Act. It would amend the bankruptcy code to give student borrowers more protections. The senators told the Senate Judiciary Committee how current bankruptcy law does not allow the discharge of student loans in the same way that other kinds of financial burdens are handled. Senator Robert Menendez and Marsha Blackburn reintroduced a bipartisan bill on Tuesday to reduce America's dependence on China for pharmaceutical manufacturing. This bill is called the Securing America's Medicine Cabinet Act 2021. It is meant to develop and increase the U.S. pharmaceutical workforce and manufacturing by partnering with universities across the country. Right now, China dominates global production of medical devices and pharmaceuticals.
They want global domination by the mid-century. This is their time to make gains.
Blackburn said, quote, "The coronavirus pandemic underscored how dangerous it is to depend on Beijing's good graces," end quote. The bill encourages the FDA to partner with up to 5 universities across the country to create centers of excellence in pharmaceutical manufacturing. These centers will develop the chemical methods and training necessary to bring the workforce back to the United States. Days after mask mandates have been reinstated in D.C., the mayor announced that the Walter Washington Convention Center is now open. The convention center will host 2 pop culture events this month. It was closed during the pandemic. Now, with the reopening, the nation's capital hopes to bring tourism back to the district. The convention center was founded in 1994 and moved to D.C. from Baltimore in 2017. Arizona lawmakers are working to pass a law to require schools to teach students about the threat of communism. The state's House just passed the bill this summer. Now it needs to pass the Senate and be signed by the governor for it to be implemented in schools. With more and more Americans having a favorable view of socialism, the Arizona State House of Representatives has just introduced a bill to require educating students of the horrors of communism. The Arizona bill aims to teach students why communism is a failed system and a threat to our democracy and liberty. Today's young people may not know that communism is evil, or some may know that it is bad, but not fully understand why that is. Arizona Representative Chuang Nguyen added a clause to the bill that would require schools to expose students to stories of people who fled communism. He's one of them.
I lost most of my cousins, my family members, due to communism. If we don't stand up to teach communism to our children, we'll lose this country.
Nguyen pointed out that communists in Vietnam drowned 250,000 people in the South China Sea and executed 86,000 when it captured Saigon. According to the Black Book on Communism, the communist ideology has caused over 100 million unnatural deaths through political campaigns, famines, and direct killings. Over 20 million people died under the Soviet Union. 65 million people died in China, including the students and pro-democracy activists killed at Tiananmen Square in 1989. And the Cambodia Communist Party killed a quarter of its total population. In the 20th century, hundreds of thousands of people came to America to escape communist regimes from countries such as the former Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, Korea, and Cuba. Even worse, it imposes atheist theory on all of its citizens, blocking people from following upright faiths. The communist specter not only ruins people when they are alive, but also drags them down after they pass away, as it cuts them off from the divine world. But many of today's students may not learn these details in their history classes anymore. In return, many young people aren't aware of the urgent need to fight against communism, allowing communist China more room to damage our nation through unfair and indecent practices. It takes away our jobs by using Chinese workers as slave laborers. It steals our intellectual property, and in 2020, it used lies and deceit to cover up the CCP virus, allowing it to spread to every country. More than 500,000 Americans died from the virus, and its impact to our nation's economy, jobs, education, and safety are unmeasurable. That's why Arizona lawmakers are pushing this bill. They say that it's imperative for young folks to be clear-eyed about the fact that the communist doctrine needs to be defeated, and that the ideology is opposite to America's founding values of liberty and freedom. The Arizona bill, if passed, would mandate schools to include comparative discussion on communism and totalitarianism and show how they, quote, conflict with the principles of freedom and democracy essential to the founding principles of the United States. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has already signed a similar bill last month. Many residents of the Sunshine State have escaped from communist Cuba and socialist Venezuela, so naturally, they want their children to know the truth about communism. As the Spanish philosopher George Santayana once said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And on that note, this concludes tonight's Capitol Report. We thank you for joining us. I'm Steve Lance. Have a great evening.